Teresa was flying home from Lima, Peru, and one of the engines on the plane caught on fire high above the Andes. The cabin filled with smoke, the alarm started blaring, and smoke seeped out of the air vents. Oh my God, she was sure this was the end of her life. For that long, hour-long turbulent ride back to terra firma, Teresa decided she didn't want to die, and if they did land safely, she would dedicate her life to empowering women through solo travel. She launched TangoDiva.com, which became the largest network for solo women travelers, and wrote 2 books on solo travel. Her TEDx talk about her second book has over 1.2 million views. Today, she's going to discuss her experience and how you can pivot a bad situation into a meaningful change. Help me welcome Teresa Rodriguez with a good round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I'm honored to get to meet all of you. So I'm Teresa, and I just wanted to roll back the tape a little bit to have a little understanding of who I am. I lived in Australia for 5 years. I did my undergrad there. I always loved travel, and when I was going to school, I was like, where could I go on one plane ride that would get me the farthest away from my parents? And Australia was the answer. So I lived in Melbourne for 5 years and did my undergrad and worked as a model and on a game show. And the game show, we traveled. And I really fell in love with traveling. Every week I was going to a new destination somewhere in Australia. So I came back to the United States, and I got involved with advertising. So I was working as and strategy for ad agencies, and I loved it in the beginning, and it was fantastic and so exciting. Well, a few years in, like a decade or so, I ended up I was living in Half Moon Bay, but my job was in San Diego, and it was a really monotonous career. I had to go to San Diego. I was working a lot. My boss was really a big micromanager, and I didn't ever connect with my colleagues because of the distance. So I was really struggling at the time with my career and what was I doing in my life? And the only time I ever felt any passion or excitement was when I traveled. And because I was in such a cutthroat industry, I could never go with my friends because it was like, okay, when can I take time off? So I was always traveling by myself. So here I am, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go on a trip. And so I decided to go down to Lima, Peru, take a week off work to go to Machu Picchu for the summer solstice. And Machu Picchu, they do this beautiful ritual where the sun comes up and there's 16 little waterfalls and rainbows come. It's just absolutely beautiful. And so I went, and it was fantastic, and I loved it. And gosh, it was wonderful, but I had to get back home. This was in 2003, and this was when the Shining Path was still around, which I don't know if you remember, but it was a terrorist group. And at the time, it was 2 years after 9/11, and so what American airlines would do is fly smaller planes to places like Lima, Peru, because it was very difficult to hijack a plane and fly it very far if it only had 2 engines, right? So that's the point of my story, is that we were in a Boeing 737. A Boeing 737 is a lot like my Spanish. I know enough to get into jail. I don't know enough to get out of jail. And so with this Boeing 737, it has enough fuel, and the 2 engines can get us to Dallas from Lima, Peru, but it can't get you any farther than that. So that's why we were flying in such a small plane with just 2 engines. So sure enough, we're in the plane, you heard what happened, and I'm like, wow, I'm in a plane that's on fire. So smoke was coming down from the air vents, and that's a really weird scene to actually see smoke coming out of air vents and hearing the alarms go off, the smoke detector alarms that they say they have in bathrooms. They actually do work. And the flight attendants were running up and down the hall, and you always wonder what this is going to feel like if you were in an emergency in a plane. But what was really interesting, everybody on the plane was silent. There wasn't any screaming like in Airplane, the movie. It was really silent. And Someone just got on. And so I had the pilot came on and said, well, folks, it looks like we lost our left engine. He turned that off, so the smoke started to clear up. He said, but we've got an hour ride back to Lima for an emergency landing. We're going to have to lose the fuel in the fuel tanks. And so, you know, a situation like this happens and you're like, wow, what would I actually do with my life? And really taking into consideration what haven't I done with my life is really what a lot of people, you know, really think of. So the first thing that I thought of was like, wow, I'm on a plane that's on fire. And my first step was to really take a good look at my life. And I wasn't happy with it. I had to acknowledge that the life that I created was not the life that I wanted. And if I was going to smash into the side of the Andes today, I would be pretty bummed that I didn't do anything of purpose or something that really brought me pleasure. So the first thing I thought was, you know what, things have got to change. And so my first step was just to take into consideration, who am I? What's really happening with my life? And I really, really wasn't happy with it. So I said, okay, what am I going to do about it? And that's when I started to think and created these steps of how to change. How does one change their life? There's a great poem by Portia Nelson, and I don't know if you know it, but it's called "There's a Hole in My Sidewalk." I'm not going to read the poem to you. You're going to be getting a handout if you want later of this talk. And it's really about where so many of us are, is we blame other people for the hole in our sidewalk and not taking responsibility for the fact there's all these different other roads we can go down, and we don't have to keep falling into that hole in the sidewalk. So that was a really powerful, for me, a very powerful poem. So the second step that I did was, it's really interesting because it's easier for us to think of the things that we don't want in our life than the things that we do want in our life. So if we just look at the ease of it all, right, and to take in human nature, right? If we look at a menu when we go to a restaurant, the first thing I always say is, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. And so it's a matter of cutting off the things, you know, taking off the things that we don't like. And I remember, you know, one of my favorite quotes and pieces of art is Michelangelo's Petra. And it's a solid block of marble that's at the Sistine Chapel. And he carved this when he was 25 years old. It's amazing. And one of my favorite quotes by him is, every block of stone has a statue inside it. It's the task of the sculpture to discover it. And for me, what I interpret that to mean is, here I am, this lump, right? I've got a career I can't stand. I've got a bunch of things in my life that are sucking up all my energy. What is it in my life that I could possibly just cut away so I could really uncover that beautiful sculpture that I know is the true life that I want to have? And so what I did is that I started writing down all the things that really don't serve me. And if you think about the things that don't serve us, it's not just our jobs, for example, like, I really hate my job, I want to quit it. It's our social media. Are we on social media too much? Are we watching the news too much, especially right now? Do we have friends in our lives that are vampires and don't serve us? You know, we've got some codependent relationships that aren't really helping us out. Are we using things like food or alcohol or, you know, movies to entertain ourselves and get ourselves away from what the real issues are in our life? I mean, I have to admit, I did love my glasses of wine and watching, you know, Sex in the City nonstop, to not have to deal with the fact that I had a crappy job that I couldn't stand. So what I did is that I really took into account all the things that I was doing in my life that were no longer serving me. And I wrote them down, and I made a commitment to just really, let's stop doing these things. So one of my biggest ones is the news. I don't watch the news. this is what I figured out. If something bad happens that's going to affect me directly, I'm going to get a call from a friend, or somebody's going to text me saying, hey, by the way, your house is on fire. So what ends up happening is when you open up that space in your life, the universe does something really, really interesting. It creates a vacuum. So what we have to do is, which is really the next step, which is step 3, is find something to fill that void. And I love the quote by George Eliot that says, it is never too late to be what you might have been. And for me, what I ended up doing, so I was on that plane in June of 2003, and I made a list of all the things that no longer served me. There was a lot of people on that list. My job was on that list. I didn't just quit my job. I made a list of all the things, and I took them out slowly. Don't cut your arm off, right? You just got to work your way through all of the little things that are not bringing you peace or happiness. They're bringing you all of these negative emotions. And so I did that. And then I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Well, there was the 3 questions that really changed my life. And I've read so much, and I've done so much work, and I've read a lot of questions in my life. A lot of people have asked me a lot of things, but these were the 3 that really resonated with me personally. And so, I encourage you to ask yourself these questions as well. So the first one was, what would you do if I gave you $10 million? And I really started thinking about that. Well, what would I do if I had $10 million? And, the first thing that came up was, well, I would quit my job and I would start a company, because, every time I talk to women about my trips of traveling by myself, they're like, oh my God, Teresa, this is such a great idea. You should start a company where you help women travel the world, maybe a travel company, or, something like that. And, the other things that I love is to help people in our community, especially the youth. And I was thinking, well, maybe if I had this money, I could start a youth program, or, so what's really great about that is when you start thinking things like this, the brain doesn't know the difference between things that are real and not real. So you start building that excitement, and the adrenaline starts running, like, what would I actually do if I had this money? Well, the next question was really, really powerful, which is, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? And I think that so much of our lives are held back by fear. Oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to fail at it. I can't, it's not going to work. I'm not that person. That's not for me. That person figured it out. I'm never going to figure it out. But if you really wake up every day and say, well, you know what, I'm going to do something today because I know I'm not going to fail, that really changes your perspective on life. And so for me, I really, really thought about it. And, all I ever wanted to do since I was in 5th grade is write books. I just love the written word. I would sit at the typewriter and write out these little books and cut them up and fold them. And I always wanted to be an author. That was always my biggest goal in life. I really was so profoundly moved by words by other people that I wanted to be able to move people with my words. So that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a writer. And the first thing I wanted to do was write a book about how to travel the world. And then I thought, well, so then the last question is what would you do if you only had 6 months to live? Well, if I only had 6 months to live, I would travel. I would grab my daughter and I would go see the world. I would every place I could possibly go. And I actually asked this question at a conference that I spoke at, and one of the women, her name's Jacqueline Boone, started a company, and it's called 6 Months to Live. So she actually took this question and built a company around it. She's actually living in China now and doing workshops that really center around what would you do if you only had 6 months to live? So those were the 3 questions that really powerfully moved me. And so when I put them all together, I was like, wow, if this is what I had $10 million and I wouldn't fail and I had 6 months to live, well, I would write a book for women about how to travel the world and where to go and what to see. it's like, wow, okay, wow. And I started feeling these emotions of the excitement of being able to accomplish something like that. And so I ended up going on a trip after that and went to Club Med. And I ended up running into the VP of marketing of all people at Club Med. And we were at dinner and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know who he was. I was like, oh my God, I have this idea. I'm going to start this website for women. I want to write this book about how, women to travel solo. I just see this huge network we can create with women. And he's like, you know what? The day you launch this company, you call me and we're going to work together. So Club Med ended up becoming my first client. So step 4 is really bringing all of this into focus, right? Like, so I can see what I want, I can feel what I want, but what does it actually look like? And that's where those 2 words, I am, really come into play. And this is where we really start to feel the emotions of what you could possibly be and what you possibly could accomplish. And so for me, what was once fuzzy, right? I was this lump, really hating my life. Then I figured out, cut all this stuff out that's no longer serving me, and then answer these 3 questions that really got me excited. And then here's the time that it is, you start to clarify that vision of what your life could possibly look like if you did have the $10 million, if you couldn't fail, and if you did have only 6 months to live. And so then I said, okay, let's get rid of the 6 months to live. I'm going to live a long time now. And I really want to do some great stuff. And so I'm going to give you the list of the 8 things, the 8 areas of your life that you can just dive into and really, really think about, well, what do I look like physically? How do I feel physically? What kind of relationships do I have in my life? What does my finances look like? What are the passions that are in my life that I really want to bring up to the surface? And, what about my creativity and spirituality? Where does this play? Am I going to be meditating in the morning? What do I want there? What's my home environment going to feel like? Do I want a nice, warm and cozy house? Is it going to be a big house? Is it going to be a small house? What am I going to do for fun, travel, and leisure? And what is going to be my purpose? How am I going to help other people? And so what I did is I wrote down all of those specifics. And for me, I wanted to be a best-selling author about a book for women that taught them how to travel the world by themselves, because I knew how much I gained from seeing the world by myself and how many new friends that I've made. And I was like, wow, if I could give that kernel to other women who were really struggling and stuck in their life, even if they just went away for the weekend, that would be a really, really powerful thing. And so I started to feel those emotions. I pretended that I was on talk shows and, would look at books that really resonated with me. And I started to create and design a world that I really, really wanted. But how am I going to get there, right? And so step 5 is really understanding the concept of the compass and the clock, which is a Stephen Covey metaphor that he uses in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And one of the quotes that I really love from Maya Angelou is, all great achievements require time. And so I really had to be gentle with myself. Yes, I wanted this. I wanted to build this company. I wanted to write this book, but it wasn't all going to happen overnight, right? And I think that so many times we set these goals and we're like, yeah, let's do it. And that's going to only take 6 months. It's like, actually, it's going to take a little bit longer, and really honoring that. The 10,000 hours is I love that phrase, 10,000 hours and 10,000 ants. And it really, truly does take some time, but it also takes some direction. And now that you've cleared out, I've cleared out all of that stuff that is no longer serving me, I had time to focus on the new direction that I wanted, which is I wanted to be a best-selling author. I wanted to empower women and I wanted to do good things for my community. So one of the parts of the Stephen Covey book is the quadrants. He talks about the 4 quadrants, and I live by the 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants, and you're going to get all of this as well, is the first one is where you manage. And that's, you know, those are things that are important and they're urgent. So taking your kids to school, making sure that your bills are paid, those are things that you got to do that they're not going to really change. And understand that part of your life and managing that time. The second is the quadrant of the focus, which is, it's important, but it's not urgent. And that, for example, is writing your novel or building your business. It is important, but right now it's not urgent, right? Because there's other things that you need to focus on. Then there's the urgent and not important. And those are the things that we try to avoid. That's where we really try to pre-pave our lives, where we make sure that we have all our bills paid so the electricity doesn't go off, that we make sure that we take good care of our cars and keep oil in them so the engine doesn't blow up, because we really want to stay out of that quadrant. And the other one, the last, is not important and not urgent. And that's the space where a lot of leisure happens. You know, reading books, taking walks, going on vacations. It's not important, it's not urgent, but it's fun. And so what I really learned how to do is I learned how to manage my life within these quadrants to reach my goal. And so my goal was to write this book, but to write this book, I would need an agent because I wanted to get the book published. I didn't want to self-publish this book. Well, where do you find agents? You find them at literary events. Well, where are those? Well, you look up every single little literary event that is near you or wherever you're capable of going, and attend every single literary event. And that's what I did. So in 2004, a year later, Tango Diva launched. And sure enough, Club Med was our first client. I attended every single literary event that I possibly could. And by 2005, I had a literary agent in New York. Levine Greenberg Rostan is my agent, my literary agent, Stephanie Rostan. And I had built this network of women and with Tango Diva, and I'll explain the name Tango Diva to you. I learned how to fly planes, and they called me Tango because my name's Teresa, and so the phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and so Tango was for Teresa. And so so that's the reason why it's called Tango Diva. And I built this company, I was going to build this company. So I got the agent, and then she sold the book in 2006 to Penguin. And I ended up getting the book deal that I wanted. The irony of this is I also pretended that I was on all these talk shows, and I did get a call from Oprah. Unfortunately, I was meeting with a VC about my company, and they called my work phone number and left a message about, wanting to talk to me about solo travel. Well, unfortunately, I didn't make it in time to call him back. And a few weeks later, Elizabeth Gilbert was on Oprah with her book. So we know where that story went. But I ended up doing a lot of television. So what I've done is, I did write my first book, which is Fly Solo, the 50 Best Places on Earth for a Girl to Travel Alone. And this was published in 2007. It actually is in a bunch of different languages. I think this one is Romanian. It's in Chinese, and it's also in Korean. I still get royalty checks for that. So that's one of the great things about building something that creates passive income. So that was my first book. My second book, which is the one that I really wanted to write first, but my agent was like, yeah, you probably, let's do the travel guide first. And so this is Body, Mind, and Solo. And this was the book that I did the TED talk about. And, just a little lesson that I learned. There is, over 1.2 million viewers, but I wish that I had them put a link to, number one, I didn't promote the book when I did my TED talk. They're not big on you promoting things, but I could have still said, this is my book, because I gave everybody a copy of it. But they didn't put a link or anything to buy the book. So I think that would have been really awesome if all of those books were, a few million books were sold from that TED talk. But I ended up doing what I wanted to do, which is I did get the book deal that I wanted, a few of them. And I did learn how to manage my time, and I really did create the life that I wanted. And, with respects to pivoting, yes, I've written my own books, but I've also helped other people write their books as well. So when you're looking at creating the life that you want and pivoting out of bad situations, yeah, your goal might be to write that best-selling novel, but perhaps you can also do other things like become a ghostwriter. So that was one of the things that I did. And I helped write this whole company book and guide called, Sarah Brown is actually working with Jack Canfield now, and they rebranded it it's called The Book of You. You can go online to The Book of You and take a 360 assessment. It's called the Berkman method. And then you'll get a Kindle guide of, the best jobs that are for you, how to lead the best life that you possibly can. So that was one of the books that I worked on that necessarily wasn't under my name, but I was still doing something that I loved. Another book that I worked on, which just came out, is an art book. And what's fantastic is I was able to help curate all the artwork that's in the book and write the introductions and all the different chapter headings. And the piece de resistance is the book that I did last year for Jean-Charles Boisset, which is called The Alchemy of the Senses, which is an interactive book that I took my daughter's. It's a huge book. It weighs a ton. But what I did is I took all the things that I loved about my daughter's books, and I put them in here, which was here is textures. So what I wanted to capture was the five senses of wine tasting and wine, and the beauty of wine. So with respects to the way I live my life now, is I am a really big vision boarder, and I still do my vision boards, which I really encourage everyone to do. And so I wanted to bring one of my little vision boards and just show you, some of the things that I think about now. So right now I'm working on a science fiction book. And when you write a best-selling novel or a best-selling book, what's really great, it gives you the freedom to do what you want to do and travel to where you want to travel. It's a little bit tough right now with COVID. I did have COVID, it's a really tough virus to get through. I'm still having little side effects. I got it in March. But when all of this passes, I still want to be able to travel. So what I really encourage everyone to do is to sit down and really get into that quadrant 2, where you're focusing on the things that you want and cutting out things that you love. So for me, I really want to get back to traveling. I love spending time with my friends up here. I want to be one of the top 5 books in the country with a science fiction book. I haven't been to Africa yet, and I really want to be a part of something bigger and greater. So really, visioning is a really powerful tool to help you to get to where you want to get to. And I am where I want to be. And now I am the editor-in-chief of Oat Living magazine. And I work with the most incredible women, some of the best writers I've ever worked with in my life. and they really bring me joy and happiness. And it's really awesome to know that we all have the capacity and the capability to create the life that we really want to live. And it happens in so many different ways. But remember, if we focus on, get rid of the stuff that doesn't serve us anymore, think about the things that we want, focus on the things that we want, and create a plan to get us there, and keep our compass and our clock in our hands, and make sure that we're following those things to get us to our final destination, which is truly a place of happiness. So thanks, guys.
Hey, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You bet. My pleasure. I also, with the handout, there's a list of books as well. And these were the most powerful books that really changed my life. So hopefully they will support you in your next journey. And if you need me or want to speak with me, my email's on that as well. So.
Teresa, may I ask a question?
Of course, sir.
My name is Rick Wilson.
Hello.
If you had $10 million and only 6 months to live, what would be the last great solo trip you would take? Where would you go and why?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I would travel around the world. So I would go like eastward, first class, and take my daughter. And I'd love events. So let's just pretend this is a COVID-free world right now. So I would want to take her to the Serengeti during, the water buffaloes going through I would go up to the up to Norway to see the Northern Lights. I would want to go to Thailand to see the Festival of the Lights. I really like I would go to Monte Carlo to see the Grand Prix. I would go to the Indianapolis 500. I would just go around the world going to like the coolest events that I possibly could go to. So that's what I would do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
Teresa, what's your next book going to be?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So my next book is a science fiction novel that takes place at the Lawrence Berkeley lab that is at the particle accelerator. So I don't know if you know anything about the particle accelerator, but it's where they can really see into the DNA and beyond the molecules. And so there's 4 scientists that are trying to find the life force particle, and the story around finding the life force particle. And a lot of San Francisco politics is in play there, along with technology and a few bad people that, when they find this life force particle, decide to do bad things with it.
Excellent. Bert?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for referring to Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It really changed my life as a starting book from there. And I actually ended up taking my kids to see Stephen Covey.
Wow.
And his talks, and it really got us going in a whole different direction than we ever were. I'm going to try and find your books and take a look at those too. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, Stephen Covey's done quite a few books. The one after that was The 8th Habit, and that was really a really powerful book as well, because that's about the purpose of where you want to go and what you want to do now that you've accomplished all this other stuff. So yeah, Stephen Covey's fantastic. And what I've done is I've given you a list of books that go from everywhere from business to also the esoteric and spiritual as well.
Thank you.
And I think everybody should read Man's Search for Meaning, if you haven't read it yet, Viktor Frankl, which is really talks about the only thing that we can control is the way that we respond to any situation. And he was at Auschwitz and survived. And that anytime I'm in a bad mood or stuck in traffic, I just remind myself I'm not in Auschwitz. We're going to get through this.
Yes, Frankl sitting in his cell.
Yeah.
Inspiration. Very good book.
I saw a question.
I do.
Eddie?
Teresa, thank you for your very, very nice presentation and sharing a lot of your personal growth and how you are and got to where you are now. I have a quote here which sits on my dining room table desk, and it's the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And I think that's Mark Twain, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned happiness, and I mentioned when I was talking earlier that we spent 5 hours with our friends, and we could have kept talking longer. And this gal, her name is Val, and I went on a business coaching seminar 20 some years ago, and her word is joy. And I just love that word, joy, and that what can we do each day to bring joy into our life, be it looking at the tide going in and out or whatever. And so when you said happiness, that's what came up for me, is how important the joy is. And I loved all of your book references, of which I'm familiar with. I haven't read them all fully, but so thank you for sharing. It was great.
That's really, really powerful. And the two books that I recommend to look at your emotional scale is Dr. Hawkins, who in Power versus Force talks about the different vibrational levels of emotion, like guilt and despair is the lowest, where joy and happiness are the highest. Also in the book that I've listed, Abraham Hicks' book as well, talks about how they've got actually have exercises in the back of the book to increase your emotional vibration. So if you're feeling worried, it'll teach you how to move one step up, because a lot of times we can't move from despair upwards. Sometimes we got to go from despair, we got to get angry, we got to feel a little bit revengeful, and then we can keep moving up the scale. And so, yeah, super powerful stuff.
Thank you.
What other questions do we have? Jill?
Hey, Teresa, what was the best? So you told us where you would go if you had one last trip, or 6 months. Where was the best though value trip that you took? Like, what was the value for your money was the greatest, or
Yeah, so I would say Barcelona was a really great value for money. Barcelona is a fantastic, beautiful city. They've got, in my first book, Fly Solo, I talk about culture, activity, weather, and social. And there's a little quiz that you can take to figure out how much culture you want, activity, how important the weather is, and how social you want to be. What's great about Barcelona, it really hits on all of those. It's got such great culture, the great museums. You've got Picasso and Gaudi. It's just fantastic. The beaches are wonderful. Public transportation is spot on, and you can take, buses down to the coast to like places like Sitges and spend the day eating strawberry crepes. And, it really is a beautiful and not super expensive trip.
And the food and wine are spectacular. And I mean, a bottle of wine was as much as a Coke almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you want to go to the most expensive place that I don't recommend, I would say Monte Carlo. That place is just, it's an absolute ripoff. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Hey, Teresa, if people wanted to do solo travel, how would you recommend they start? Should they get with a travel agent, or should they just do their own work finding where and the information? We have our resident travel expert, Christopher Wiseman, who I think may have had to leave, but you guys should meet because he's a big traveler. But what do you recommend for that?
Well, I think the first thing that I recommend is to understand what your expectations are on a trip. What do you want to get out of this trip? Because a lot of times we just go to places because people are like, let's go to Hawaii. Well, what is it, the emotions that you want to feel, and what are the activities that you want to do? Do you want to sit by the beach? Do you want to go hiking? Do you want to meet people? Do you want to go to restaurants and bars? I mean, this is also we're talking about, post-COVID or pre-COVID. What is it that you want to experience? And when you really write down the things that you want to experience, find the places that will deliver that to you. But also the number one thing, especially with solo travel, is safety. Make sure you're going to a place that's safe. I ended up going to Fiji during a coup, and that was the biggest mistake ever. It sounded like a great island, but the military was in control. So really look at the places that are safe, especially for women.
James, you have a question? James Cavuto?
I have a question. Great talk, Teresa. I want to ask a question about your scary flight over the Andes. Were you aware there was a movie that came out called Alive about a flight that went down in the Andes? I think it was during the 70s, and it was a rugby team. And the plane crashed, but they didn't find the survivors for a long time, so they ended up resorting to cannibalism.
Oh God. See what I'm saying? I was lucky.
You were aware of that movie during the time, and if so, what body parts you think would have been the most tasty?
Well, I would have definitely, if we had to eat people, I would have definitely gone for a thigh, or maybe some barbecued ribs. Well, they say humans taste a little bit like pork, right?
Better than chicken.
Oh, that's funny.
All right, I would have gone for the cocoa leaves. I'll be honest with you. I've gone straight for the cocoa leaves.
Bill, you're an author. You always have a good question.
You know, I'm sitting there just soaking all this up. This is such a fantastic talk. I just feel a little badly that I don't have the resources to do the kind of travel that Teresa is advocating. But one thing that I will agree with her on, and I really commend her for taking the opportunity, seizing the moment, if you will, when she had a terrifying experience, because a lot of people are destroyed by terrifying, dangerous, life-threatening experiences. And it can go either way. Either you can become a basket case,
right?
Or you can, the philosopher said, whatever doesn't kill me strengthens me. I've had my share of dangerous situations, and I am with your philosophy, and that is make the best of it and take inventory and say to yourself, my God, what if that had been it?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to move forward with all the things that I wanted to do, So I think that I really commend you for, taking that direction rather than the other one and building on it. It's fantastic. I'll be reading your book. I never find the money to accomplish the
well, I mean, that's a whole nother speech. And I think that was one of I was going to do that before COVID. Was the goal was like, how do you travel on the cheap? And there's really a lot of ways that you can travel on the cheap. As a writer, we get a lot of fantastic trips. And so, writing about trips, talking with places that you want to go about, writing about your experience can give you media discounts and media rates. And, I went to Vegas. The reason I went to Vegas is I did have COVID. I do have the antibodies, so I feel a lot safer. I wouldn't have gone if I didn't have them. And, I am an AARP member and a AAA member. So you ask for those discounts. Frontier, our flights on Frontier Airline was $89 round trip to Vegas. So there are ways to work the system,
Yeah, right.
especially right now, but be careful.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for your talk.
Yeah.
Christine?
I just want to make a comment and a thank you to our speaker. You're talking about, for example, Viktor Frankl. He was one of my professors when graduate school. And he was there, and his philosophy, of course, is man's search for meaning. He or she who has the reason to live can survive almost anyhow. And I took that out with me and traveled. I've been all over the world in 30 or 40 countries, but mostly music was my connection with people, and language and things that meant something to them. And I was very, very fortunate and blessed that with all the hitchhiking I did in so many places, nothing awful happened. A few kind of frightening situations, but nothing that was awful, where I heard, I was in a place where there were wolves at one point, and there I was out in the wilderness, and I got fortunate and met some great people. And you never know what's going to happen. I won't bore you with that, but I look forward to reading your things and hopefully to connecting at some point in the future. It would be a pleasure.
Yes, and I just want a little advice, and I love what you just shared because it's so true. I think that the higher that you raise your energy, that energy and the law of attraction is going to attract other people that are also at that energy level. So if you're hanging out with turkeys, you're not going to ever be able to fly with the eagles. So that's why one of the parts of just cutting away the things that no longer serve you is cut all those people that with that negative energy, man. So you can go fly with eagles, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, I got also the privilege of flying with the Blue Angel through this organization.
Oh,
At one point,
awesome.
I meant, well, partially through this, but through other things. Anyway, it's been an amazing joy, and I admire your, and I'm inspired by a lot of what you've done. So I look forward to communicating.
Awesome.
Oh, Betty Tage?
You mentioned, Teresa, about your books for children. Are they younger children, like from 6 to 10, or are they older children?
Oh no, that was a wine book. I actually was.
That's what I thought about.
Yeah,
wine
and I should have brought the. If you wait a second, I'll go get the actual mock-up that I made that sold the book. So just one second. I apologize really quickly.
Don't you want to all get on a plane and go somewhere and wish that things were different right now? It's like we're missing out on time by not being able to travel and do things.
Yeah, I want to go back to Barcelona.
Yeah, I do
Hello.
too.
Sorry, I am. So when I talked to Jean-Charles Boisset about the book, what I did is I created this little mock-up. And at the time, my daughter was only a few years old. And so I said, let's get a book that's got all this fun color and textures. And let's put a mirror in it and pages and pop-ups and textures. I wanted a cootie catcher, but we couldn't figure out how to put a cootie catcher in there. But so that turned into that.
Okay.
So when you open that up, this is velvet.
Nice.
And so, ta-da. So this is, this is an example of complete creation, focusing on what you want and making it happen for reals.
Thank you.